You stood at the counter watching her roll the bread tight without measuring, seal the wax paper with a tuck that meant the party was starting. That kind of kitchen knowledge never came from cookbooks. Here are 30 easy homemade sandwiches from the 1970s no one makes anymore. The patty melt disappeared so quietly from home kitchens that nobody noticed it was gone until they looked at a diner menu and felt something like grief. It wasn't a hamburger and it wasn't a grilled cheese. It was the thing in between, which is exactly why it worked. Ground beef pressed into an oval patty on cast iron, then slid onto dark rye with Swiss and caramelized onions that had been going in butter for 20 minutes before the meat touched the pan. The whole thing went back on the griddle, pressed under something heavy, pulled when the bread was dark gold and the cheese surrendered. Patty melts appeared at Tiny Nailor's Drive-In in Los Angeles around 1950 and spread through diner culture over 2 decades, arriving in suburban kitchens by the early 1970s. The rye was the key. That slight sourness cutting through the fat of the beef and the sweetness of the onions. The ones that remember how to make it right are getting harder to find. The Western egg sandwich lived in the middle ground between breakfast and lunch that the 1970s always seemed full of. Scrambled eggs cooked with diced ham, green bell pepper, and white onion, just set enough to hold together, spooned onto thick white bread or a Kaiser roll while still warm. The story involves railroad workers heading west through Denver, the ham and eggs as portable protein, the peppers as whatever grew nearby, and whether accurate or not, it became a short-order counter-staple through the post-war decades, appearing on coffee shop menus from Ohio to Oregon without explanation. Your grandmother made it on Saturday mornings when the eggs needed to be used. She never called it a Denver sandwich. She called it eggs with the leftover ham. You haven't made it since she stopped cooking. Nobody told you tuna and apple belonged together. You had to discover it by accident at a covered dish supper, eating before anyone explained what was in it. The combination appears in junior league cookbooks and church recipe collections from the era. Star-kissed, drained and flaked, folded into Hellmann's with celery, lemon juice, and half a Granny Smith chopped small. Skippy and Hellmann's ran joint advertising campaigns in the 1970s Los Angeles Herald promoting sweet and savory combinations, validating what home cooks had already figured out. It went on white bread, or sometimes whole wheat if the household had tipped toward the health food movement. The apple browned fast if you didn't move quickly. You made it and ate it that afternoon. She made it every Tuesday after the grocery run. Nobody makes it on Tuesdays anymore. Hot open-faced roast beef, white bread flat on a plate, overlapping slices of Sunday's leftover roast beef, then the gravy brown and glossy from drippings, flour, and beef stock, poured so generously the bread disappeared beneath it, was the kind of meal that required a fork and a knife but cost less than $1.50 and still felt like effort. In the upper Midwest, they called it a commercial. Beef commercial, turkey commercial. Diner shorthand on menus from Minnesota to Wisconsin through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You ordered it because it was cold and the mashed potatoes cost 30 cents extra, and you always got them. The home version was made on Mondays from Sunday's roast. The drippings scraped from the refrigerator where they'd solidified overnight into a rust-colored disc that smelled of everything good the oven had done to the meat. When the Sunday roast stopped, this disappeared with it. Before anyone questioned whether a frozen fish stick belonged between 2 slices of white bread, there was a generation of children who knew exactly how good it was. If the roast was Sunday and the gravy was Monday, the fish stick sandwich was Wednesday. Gorton's of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which introduced frozen fish sticks during the 1950s as part of the first wave of foods marketed during the television advertising boom, crispy and mild and completely acceptable to children who refused anything that smelled too strongly of the sea. Sticks baked until the coating cracked, transferred hot onto soft white bread with tartar sauce from a jar. The bread steamed slightly against the heat, which was the whole point. That warmth transferring through, making it part of the meal instead of just its container. These were after-school sandwiches, lunchbox sandwiches, the sandwiches of households where the freezer did serious work. They went quiet when families decided frozen fish sticks were beneath them. The French dip at home arrived in suburban kitchens in the early 1960s and stayed through the 70s as something that seemed fancier than it was. Cole's Restaurant and Philippe's, both in Los Angeles, have argued since 1918 about who first dropped a bun into pan drippings and called it lunch. But the genius was the cup of warm au jus beside the sandwich, turning eating into a ritual requiring technique. At home, thin-sliced deli roast beef, broth simmered with garlic and a bay leaf, crusty Italian bread, provolone under the broiler for 3 minutes. The dipping cup was just a coffee mug. Children who grew up with these sandwiches learned the correct procedure, a quick drag through the au jus, not a soak. The bread should still have resistance when you bit it. The ones who soaked were corrected. That small instruction, passed at the dinner table, is the kind of knowledge that goes quiet with the people who held it. Cream cheese and sliced green olives on white bread was the sandwich of the bridge club, the ladies' luncheon, the church social where food appeared on plates you weren't supposed to stack. Philadelphia cream cheese spread thick on crustless bread, manzanilla olives from a small jar, cut into triangles. It was everywhere from the 1940s through the 70s, appearing in Methodist church cookbooks and junior league collections with the frequency of a staple. The olive brine cut the cream cheese richness in exactly the right way. Oscar Mayer discontinued its olive loaf in the early 2000s, removing the last commercial version of this flavor combination from grocery counters. The homemade version outlasted it, but not by much. The bridge clubs disbanded, the church socials shrank. The women who made these sandwiches were gone. Their recipe card said only cream cheese, olives, white bread. They assumed you knew the rest. If you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, you know what an egg foo young sandwich is. If you grew up anywhere else, you've never heard of it. An egg foo young patty, eggs beaten with bean sprouts, scallions, and pork, pan-fried in a loose disc, between 2 slices of white bread with mayonnaise, lettuce, and dill pickles, a combination that should not have worked but absolutely did. The sandwich took root in St. Louis in the 1940s, when Chinese-American restaurants began adapting for Midwestern customers who wanted familiar flavors in portable form. The briny pickle against the savory egg was the whole argument for its existence. By the 1970s, it was a fixture at old-school St. Louis lunch counters, surviving into the 80s before gradually fading. A handful of establishments still make it today. Everywhere else, it simply never happened. A community's gift to its neighbors that never reached the rest of the country. The hot, open-faced turkey sandwich was what the week after Thanksgiving looked like before anyone invented the leftover pot pie. It was also what Tuesday looked like in any decade when whole turkeys sold for under $1 a pound, which through the post-war years into the 1970s they often did. Sliced roast turkey laid over white bread, then the giblet gravy. Neck and giblets simmered an hour before the bird went in, the stock thickened with a flour roux, finished with the pan drippings poured generously. Television dinners of the era tried to replicate this in aluminum trays. They failed. The difference was the turkey drippings. That slightly sweet, mineral-depth chicken drippings never matched, and the way the bread absorbed at the edges while holding structure at the center. The TV dinner industry understood the concept. It could not replicate the smell of the kitchen in the 20 minutes before this hit the table. The Reuben made at home told you something about the household's ambitions. You weren't making one unless you were committed. Corned beef from the deli counter, not pre-sliced lunch meat. Swiss, not American. Sauerkraut drained and pressed dry. Thousand Island or Russian dressing depending on which side of the argument you fell on. Dark marble rye buttered on the outside. Everything into a cast iron skillet, weighted, flipped once, pulled when the cheese went glossy and the bread reached walnut shell brown. The origin debate, Arnold Reuben's restaurant in New York, 1914, or Reuben Kulikovsky at the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha in the 1920s, was irrelevant to the families making it on Friday nights. What mattered was the press of the sandwich, the way everything melted together under weight and heat into something that tasted like it had always existed. Without the weight and the heat, you had ingredients. That distinction was the whole recipe. But before any of those diner sandwiches reached the suburban kitchen, something older had been feeding the Midwest for 50 years already. You couldn't make a loose meat sandwich by accident. You had to know why the meat was supposed to fall apart. Fred Angel opened the first Maid-Rite in Muscatine, Iowa in 1926. Seasoned ground beef cooked slow in beef broth until the liquid was almost gone. Not a patty, not sauced like a sloppy Joe, just loose, crumbly beef spooned onto a steamed bun with yellow mustard and dill pickles. No sauce, no ketchup. The meat was the thing, and the thing about it was restraint, a philosophy that spread across Iowa and into surrounding states through the 1960s and 70s, showing up at high school cafeterias for a quarter and church basements on Friday nights. If you had to ask what held the sandwich together, the answer was nothing. That was the point. The French bread pizza sandwich, called a stromboli in Indiana, called nothing in dozens of Midwestern kitchens that made it without naming it, lived at the crossroads of the home pizza craze and the Italian sub-tradition in the 1970s. Nazareno Romano had created the original rolled stromboli in 1950 in Essington, Pennsylvania. What arrived in Midwestern home kitchens was simpler. Italian or French bread sliced lengthwise, pizza sauce from a jar, browned Italian sausage, mozzarella from a block, everything under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the kitchen smelled like a pizza restaurant. Ground sausage at Nick's English Hut in Bloomington, Indiana, became so well known that alumni still talk about it decades later, and the home version followed. It faded when frozen pizza got cheap enough that making it yourself felt unnecessary, and a generation stopped pulling it from the oven with their own hands. The chicken salad sandwich with red grapes changed the moment it arrived on a croissant. Before that, it had always been a sensible thing: poached chicken pulled fine, celery cut thin, mayonnaise enough to hold it. But croissants were new. Pepperidge Farm introduced them to American supermarkets in the early 1970s, and the effect on the ladies' lunch circuit was immediate. Suddenly, chicken salad had a vessel worthy of its ambitions. The grapes were the decade's addition, sweet against the savory, their juiciness cutting through the richness of the mayo and the slight chew of cold chicken. It appeared at bridal showers, bridge luncheons, church women's auxiliaries, anywhere food was meant to be presented rather than simply eaten. Cutting the croissant was the whole event, the flake of the pastry, the way it compressed slightly under the knife. The women who made these sandwiches made them the same way every time. You knew it was hers before you saw whose plate it came from. The hot dog split down the middle and broiled with cheese answered the question of what to do when the buns ran out or when someone wanted something hot without starting a whole production. A standard ballpark or Oscar Mayer cut lengthwise without going all the way through, the interior pressed open, a line of yellow mustard laid in, then a strip of American cheese folded into the groove. The whole thing slid under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the hot dog skin tightened and split at the edges. Some households put it back in a bun afterward. Others served it without, the hot dog standing alone on the plate with the cheese pooled in the split. An open-faced situation that required a fork and constituted a real meal in the households that served it that way. Children learned which version their household made and understood the other version was wrong. The correct procedure was not a recipe, it was just how it was done. The tuna melt on an English muffin arrived in American kitchens riding the same wave that brought the English muffin into mainstream grocery stores. Thomas's had begun national distribution through the 1950s, and by the 60s, the nooks and crannies pitch had made them a household staple. The combination was almost inevitable. Tuna salad made with Hellmann's, mixed with celery and a little onion, spooned onto a split and toasted English muffin half. A slice of cheddar laid over the top, everything back under the broiler for 3 to 4 minutes until the cheese darkened at the edges. The sound was the whole experience. That faint sizzle when the broiler heat reached the cheese, followed by the smell that filled the kitchen in the last 90 seconds before you pulled it. You could hear when it was ready. The people who knew what they were listening for are mostly gone now. The Kentucky Hot Brown arrived at home tables across the South and Midwest in the years after the Brown Hotel in Louisville closed its doors in 1971, a 12-year shuttering that pushed the dish off its home menu and into home kitchens, where families who remembered the hotel dining room began making their own. Fred K. Schmidt had created the original at the Brown in 1926, open-faced turkey on toast, draped with Mornay sauce. Bechamel finished with parmesan and romano, then bacon strips, paprika, broiled until the sauce blistered at the edges. The home version substituted sharp cheddar when the proper Mornay felt like too much on a weeknight. It was still extraordinary. The hotel reopened in 1985 and put the original back on the menu. The home versions made during those 14 quiet years were, by most accounts, better. Cream cheese, walnut, and raisin on date nut bread occupied a category the 1970s hadn't finished naming. Not quite dessert, not savory lunch, appearing at both without apology. Date nut bread carried its own history. A Depression-era staple when dates were cheap, the recipe appearing in 1930s, Pillsbury and Betty Crocker pamphlets as an economical sweet bread that kept 4 days on the counter. By the 1970s, it lived on the church tea table, sliced thin and spread with Philadelphia cream cheese, a few walnut pieces, a scattering of golden raisins. The combination was sweet and faintly earthy, the cream cheese bridging the gap between dense bread and dried fruit. Grandmothers made them for holidays, silver trays at Christmas morning, never written down as a recipe because everyone already knew how to make them. Nobody makes them now. The cannibal sandwich, seasoned raw ground beef on dark rye with sliced raw onion and salt, has appeared on Wisconsin holiday tables since before anyone thought to document it, descended from the German Met tradition brought by immigrants who settled Milwaukee and the surrounding counties in the mid-1800s. You served it the day the beef was ground, the meat fresh enough to be bright red all the way through, mixed with salt, pepper, and sometimes caraway. The rye was dark and slightly sour. The onion was sharp. It was assembled at room temperature and eaten without ceremony because the families who made it had been eating this their whole lives and considered the hesitation of outsiders a reasonable response to inexperience, not an argument against the sandwich. The Milwaukee Health Department issues an annual reminder around Christmas that raw beef carries risks. The families who make this sandwich have read it for decades. They make the sandwich. Pineapple and cream cheese on homemade nut bread was the sandwich that appeared at every church potluck from roughly 1950 through 1980 without anyone being required to bring it. Someone always did, without announcement, without being asked. Crushed pineapple drained and folded into Philadelphia cream cheese, spooned onto slices of homemade walnut or banana bread dense enough to hold the filling without going soggy. The pineapple gave it a faint sweetness that felt, in a church fellowship hall in Ohio or Indiana, genuinely exotic. Cut into small squares, toothpicks in each piece because that was how it was done. The toothpick, a declaration that this was an occasion, not just lunch. The women who made it could tell each other's versions apart by the bread. The filling was fixed, and had been fixed for longer than any of them could remember. The Prosperity Sandwich began at the Mayfair Hotel in St. Louis in the 1920s as a formal dining room dish and spent the next 50 years quietly becoming one of the city's most distinctive lunch traditions, known almost entirely to those who had grown up eating it. Open-faced toast, thin-sliced ham, thin-sliced turkey, mushrooms sautéed in butter, then a cheddar cream sauce, thicker than gravy, made with sharp cheddar, butter, cream, and Worcestershire, poured over everything and broiled until the edges blistered. The Mayfair was demolished in 1975, but the sandwich survived in St. Louis homes and restaurants that carried it quietly through the decades. To eat it was to understand why the Mayfair served it to its guests. It tasted like a city congratulating itself. It still appears on a small number of St. Louis menus today, unhurried by the decades that have passed since anyone outside Missouri noticed. 4 toothpicks, 1 per quadrant, were the whole difference between a club sandwich and a pile of ingredients that slid apart before anyone reached the second half. The club sandwich was already old by the time the 1970s arrived, the Saratoga Clubhouse in upstate New York having invented it in 1894. But the toothpick protocol was what made the home version work. 3 layers of white bread toasted, turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, mayonnaise, the structure cut into 4 triangles, a toothpick through each. Without them, you had ambition and mess. The home version had one honest advantage over restaurant versions. The turkey was usually real roasted turkey from earlier in the week, not deli meat, and the bacon came straight from the skillet while still crackling. That version, the one that smelled like a real kitchen, is rarely made anymore. The chicken parm sandwich arrived in American home kitchens through a roundabout path, from Italian-American restaurant menus in the Northeast to Better Homes and Gardens coverage of the casserole trend, landing on Midwestern tables by the mid-1970s. Thin sliced chicken breast, pounded flat, dredged in seasoned breadcrumbs and pan-fried in olive oil until golden. A spoonful of jarred marinara, shredded mozzarella from a block, everything under the broiler for 3 minutes. The bread was Italian, cut from a loaf rather than a roll, so the sandwich required both hands and genuine commitment. The smell when it came out, tomato and browning cheese and hot oil, was the smell of effort, the smell of someone deciding that Wednesday was worth it. Midweek, 2 kids at the table, bread that needed to be cut on a board before anyone could eat. That kind of sandwich required intention. Fewer people have that kind of intention on a Wednesday now. The shrimp salad sandwich arrived in American home kitchens in the 1960s, carried in on refrigerated trucks, finally making frozen shrimp affordable at supermarkets nationwide. Before that, shrimp had been a restaurant ingredient or a regional one, something Gulf Coast families ate fresh and everyone else encountered occasionally in a can. Once the price came down to under $2 a pound by the early 1970s, home cooks folded it into the template they already knew. Chopped small, mixed with Hellmann's and celery, a squeeze of lemon, fresh dill if the garden was going, spooned onto white toast. It appeared at baby showers, ladies' lunches, church suppers, anywhere the host wanted to signal something slightly more special than egg salad without the effort of a hot dish. The dill was the secret. Without it, the sandwich tasted like something approximating shrimp. With it, it tasted like the ocean arranged on a plate, and that made all the difference. The bacon and tomato on toast, 2 of the 3 elements of the BLT, assembled without apology for the missing lettuce, was the sandwich of August, when the garden tomatoes were at their absolute peak and the lettuce felt like an afterthought nobody needed. Thick-cut bacon fried until just past crispy, drained, laid onto white toast, then a thick slice of a real August tomato still warm from the vine, then mayonnaise on the other side, the whole thing pressed together so the toast started absorbing tomato juice immediately. Some households added black pepper directly to the tomato slice before assembly. This was non-negotiable in those households, unthinkable in the ones that didn't. She made these every August from the first ripe tomato until the plants gave out. You looked forward to August because of this sandwich. The grocery store tomatoes in February are not the same thing. They are not even the same category. The cream cheese and jelly pinwheel. Crustless white bread spread with cream cheese and a thin layer of jam, rolled tight, wrapped in wax paper, refrigerated, then sliced into spirals, appeared wherever women gathered, and presentation mattered as much as what you were eating. Helen Corbett, who ran the Zodiac Room at Neiman Marcus in Dallas from 1955 onward, popularized the rolled sandwich technique through her influential cookbooks, and from there it spread through junior league networks and church women's auxiliaries across the country. The jelly was grape or strawberry. The wax paper was essential. Without it, the roll unwound during refrigeration, and you had a mess instead of pinwheels. You unwrapped them carefully, cut them on a diagonal, arranged them with the spiral facing up. The spiral had to face up. Everyone who made these understood that. The ones who made them are mostly gone now, and the trays at the gatherings look different without them. The ham and Swiss pinwheel roll-up, deli ham laid flat, a slice of Swiss, a line of yellow mustard, rolled into a cylinder, secured with toothpicks, sliced into rounds, appeared on party platters from the mid-1960s through the 1980s with such regularity that it constituted its own food category, the thing that disappeared off the tray before anyone noticed they were eating it. Betty Crocker's Party Cookbook, first published in 1960 and revised through the decade, featured this as a reliable cocktail hour staple, and from there it entered the amateur entertaining canon. The toothpick was structural and also presentational. It meant someone had made the effort to hold things together, which, at a birthday party in 1973, constituted elegance. These still appear sometimes, at reunions where someone's mother is cooking. When she is gone, they stop showing up. The Italian sub made at home began with Giovanni Amato, a Portland, Maine street vendor who in 1902 started selling sandwiches to dock workers: ham, cheese, olives, onions, green peppers on a soft Italian roll, dressed with oil, and spread through Italian-American communities before arriving in mainstream home kitchens as a weekend project in the 1970s. At home, the construction was personal and exact: Genoa salami, capicola or ham, provolone, banana pepper rings from a jar, red onion, shredded lettuce, olive oil and red wine vinegar, dried oregano, salt, and black pepper on a long Italian roll. Every Italian-American household had a non-negotiable assembly order and a non-negotiable ratio of meat to bread. These ratios were not written down. They were correct because that was how they were done, and any deviation, too much lettuce, the wrong oil ratio, was noticed and mentioned at the table without hesitation. The chicken, apple, and walnut sandwich on whole wheat existed in a specific 1970s moment when whole wheat bread stopped being a specialty item and started appearing on ordinary grocery store shelves. Cold chicken pulled from the night before's roast, a sliced apple, a handful of roughly chopped walnuts, Hellmann's with lemon, sometimes celery salt. The combination descended from the Waldorf salad, which Oscar Cherky assembled at the Waldorf Astoria in 1896, translated into sandwich form by home cooks who found the decade's preoccupation with natural ingredients a reasonable way to use leftover chicken. She made it on the days she was thinking about her health, which were also the days she used the whole wheat bread, and felt quietly good about Tuesday. Nobody in the household understood at the time that these sandwiches were a form of love. You understand it now. Egg salad on toast was the after-school sandwich of a generation that came home to an empty house and knew how to handle a boiled egg. Hard-boiled eggs cooled and peeled, mashed with a fork, mixed with Hellmann's and yellow mustard, a rib of celery chopped fine, salt and white pepper, spread thick on buttered white toast. Methodist church cookbooks from the 1950s through the 70s show egg salad as the most frequently appearing covered dish contribution, brought in a bowl with bread on the side, reliable and portable and universally eaten. She made it on Fridays during Lent. She made it when the refrigerator was low and the eggs were dependable. She made it as if the eggs would always be there, and the hands doing this would always be there to make them. The eggs are still there. The hands are not. The tomato and Hellmann's on thick homemade white bread was the last honest thing about summer. A sandwich that existed only 6 weeks out of the year if you were doing it right, and not at all if you weren't. Garden tomatoes sliced thick, laid on homemade white bread still slightly warm from the oven, spread generously with Hellmann's, eaten immediately because homemade bread with a ripe tomato begins to deteriorate the moment it becomes a sandwich, and patience is a mistake. Hellmann's ran advertising campaigns through the 1950s and 70s promoting the tomato sandwich specifically. "Bring out the best," the slogan went. And they were not wrong, but the best was the tomato, not the jar. And the tomato was the garden, and the garden was her, and she is gone now, and August is quieter than it used to be. If ham salad was a mother's invention, the cheese and grape jelly sandwich was a child's. Kraft ran recipe cards in the 1960s and 70s, pushing every combination of Velveeta and processed American cheese they could dream up, and somewhere in that golden age of supermarket ingenuity, grape jelly met a slice of cheddar, and nobody looked back. Kids made it themselves. That was half the appeal. 2 slices of white bread, a thick square of cheese peeled from its plastic sleeve, a knife load of Welch's grape, pressed together and eaten over the sink the same way their fathers ate liverwurst. Parents who caught you making one shook their heads but said nothing because the sweet, salty logic of it actually worked. The cheese held its ground against the sugar, the jelly cut through the salt, and for about 3 minutes you had something that tasted like you'd invented it yourself. You hadn't. Every kid on the block already knew. Sardine sandwiches delivered complete protein and essential fats to families who couldn't afford fresh fish or expensive meats during lean times. Small tins of sardines packed in oil sat on pantry shelves, ready to become instant meals whenever hunger called. The tiny fish were mashed onto bread with a fork, their salty, oily richness spreading easily. Some families added sliced onion or a squeeze of lemon to cut through the fishiness. The flavor was bold and unmistakably oceanic, filling kitchens with a distinctive aroma. A single tin could feed 2 people when stretched with plenty of bread, making sardines remarkably economical. The calcium from soft, edible bones provided nutrition that growing children desperately needed. Sardine sandwiches appeared in factory lunch pails and school bags throughout working-class America. Seniors remember their fathers eating these after long shifts. The tin opened with a key that peeled back the lid. The sandwich carried honest nourishment, tasting better than its humble reputation suggested. You could smell a Liverwurst sandwich from across the cafeteria, that dense mineral scent announcing itself before you opened the wax paper. Liverwurst and raw onion on rye was a deli standard from the 1940s through the 70s, common as pastrami in neighborhoods where German immigrants had settled. The sausage was soft enough to spread, ground from pork liver with black pepper, marjoram, and allspice, sliced thick at the counter. You ate it on dark rye with spicy brown mustard and onion rings sharp enough to water your eyes. In the Midwest, sweet pickles went on top. In the Northeast, dill. Either way, it was a workingman's lunch, filling, cheap, strong enough to carry you through the afternoon. Boar's Head stopped producing it entirely in 2024. The old German delis that sliced it fresh are closing one by one. If your father ate liverwurst, you remember the smell. You probably never made one yourself. In the South, a pineapple sandwich was not a joke. It was a real thing made by real women who saw nothing strange about laying a ring of canned Dole pineapple on a slice of white bread spread with Duke's mayonnaise. The tang of the fruit against the richness of the mayo was a flavor profile that made perfect sense to anyone who'd grown up eating sweet pickles on ham. That push and pull between sugar and fat was the whole architecture of Southern sandwich making. Some added a slice of American cheese, others sprinkled the pineapple with a little salt. The most committed version grilled it, letting the cheese melt and the pineapple caramelize until the kitchen smelled like a county fair griddle. It sounds impossible until you taste it, and then it sounds like your grandmother knew something about flavor balance that culinary school couldn't teach. The pineapple had to be canned. Fresh was too tart, too wet, too unpredictable. Control was part of the recipe. Bacon dripping sandwiches turned saved cooking fat into meals delivering rich, smoky satisfaction without wasting precious bacon. Families saved bacon grease in jars beside the stove, the accumulated fat representing flavor wealth too valuable to discard. The drippings were spread onto bread while still warm, absorbing into the soft surface and creating butter-like richness. Salt was usually unnecessary since the bacon fat carried plenty, though some added pepper for warmth. The flavor was unmistakably bacon without requiring actual bacon, stretching the essence of expensive cured pork across many meals. During the Depression and wartime rationing, this sandwich appeared in households where meat was rationed or unaffordable. Children ate these without complaint because the smoky richness satisfied cravings that plain bread never could. The fat provided calories desperately needed by growing bodies and working adults. Seniors remember their mothers guarding the bacon grease jar, knowing those drippings transformed ordinary bread. Your grandmother made the banana and mayonnaise sandwich the same way every time. Ripe banana sliced lengthwise, a thick spread of Duke's mayo, 2 pieces of the softest white bread in the house. In Southern kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, this was as common as sweet tea. The combination sounds wrong to modern ears, but the creamy tang of mayo against the sweetness of ripe banana was something close to perfect. It cost almost nothing. A single banana ran about 2 cents during the Depression, and mayo stretched across every meal. Dale Earnhardt Jr. still talks about eating them, but he describes them the way you describe something from another world. You either grew up with it or you didn't. And if you didn't, nobody could explain it. The woman who made yours is probably gone now. The sandwich left when she did. Ham salad started the way everything started in those kitchens, with leftovers. The Sunday ham came out of the oven on a platter, fed the family through dinner and cold slices on Monday, and by Tuesday, the rest went through the hand-cranked meat grinder that was bolted to the edge of the counter. You could hear it from the next room, the rhythmic grinding of metal teeth turning cooked meat into something spreadable. She mixed the ground ham with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a little mustard, maybe diced celery if she had it, and packed it into a Tupperware bowl that lived in the refrigerator all week. It fed whoever needed feeding: school lunches, afternoon snacks, a quick supper when nobody felt like cooking. The beauty of ham salad was its refusal to go to waste. Nothing was thrown out. The bone went into soup, the fat went into beans, and the last scraps went through that grinder until there was nothing left but the smell of smoke on your hands. Crackling bread sandwiches combined two Southern traditions into one gloriously rich meal that wasted nothing from the family hog. Cracklings, the crispy bits left after rendering pork fat into lard, were stirred into cornbread batter before baking, creating bread studded with salty, crunchy pork pieces. Sliced thick and still warm, the crackling bread was eaten between pieces of regular bread or simply split and buttered. The flavor was intensely porky, salty, and satisfying in ways that plain cornbread could never match. This sandwich represented the waste-nothing philosophy defining rural Southern cooking during hard times. Every scrap of the pig found purpose, including the crispy remnants of rendering. Families made crackling bread during hog killing season when lard production created pounds of cracklings. The bread kept well for days, becoming sandwich material for lunch pails and quick suppers. Seniors from rural areas remember the smoky aroma filling kitchens and the satisfying crunch of crackling studded bread. In every small-town grocery from the 1940s through the 70s, there was a tub of Bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store Bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of Bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, prepackaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that Bologna by hand. The men who ate sardine sandwiches did not apologize for them. They peeled back the tin lid with the key, laid the small silver fish across dark rye bread, squeezed lemon from a wedge in the refrigerator door, added a line of hot mustard, and ate at the kitchen table with a glass of beer and the evening paper. The sardines came packed in olive oil or mustard sauce, imported from Portugal or Norway, and the brands mattered. King Oscar for the purists, Beach Cliff for the budget-minded, Brunswick for the ones who bought whatever was on sale. During the Depression, sardines were protein you could afford when meat was a luxury, and that reputation clung to the fish long after the hard times ended. By the 70s, a sardine sandwich was a working man's lunch, eaten without ceremony. The smell lingered in the kitchen for hours afterward, and everyone knew what he'd had. He didn't care. The fish cost 30 cents a tin and kept him full until dinner. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches sound strange to modern ears, but were beloved comfort food throughout the South during the mid-20th century. The combination emerged when bananas became affordable, and Southern cooks discovered that mayonnaise's creamy richness paired surprisingly well with the fruit's sweetness. Ripe bananas were sliced onto soft white bread slathered with mayo, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt. The texture was creamy and soft, almost like eating banana pudding in sandwich form. Children loved these because they tasted like a treat despite costing almost nothing. The sandwich provided quick energy from natural sugars, while the mayo added satisfying richness. Families packed them for school lunches, knowing they stayed fresh longer than many alternatives. Duke's mayonnaise was the preferred brand in Southern households. Today, this sandwich divides people into believers and skeptics, but seniors who grew up eating them remember the simple pleasure of something special from humble ingredients. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. Your father came home from the deli with it wrapped in white butcher paper, the smell leaking through before he set the bag on the counter. Liverwurst, soft, spreadable, made from pork liver ground so fine it went on bread like cold butter, was a staple in German-American households from the 40s through the mid-70s. He'd spread it thick on dark rye, top it with a raw onion ring and a stripe of yellow mustard, and eat it standing over the sink. In the Midwest, you ate yours with sweet pickled gherkins. In the Northeast, dill pickles and nothing else. Braunschweiger, the smoked version, carried an even deeper flavor, almost bacon-like, and the old German butcher shops sold it by the half-pound from a ceramic crock behind the counter. By the 80s, the organ meat version had taken hold, and Liverwurst began its long slide off deli menus. Boar's Head stopped making it entirely in 2024. The rye bread it belonged on, the good kind with caraway seeds so thick they cracked between your teeth that bread is harder to find than the meat. Onion sandwiches carried a sharp, pungent honesty that defined working-class meals when meat was scarce and gardens provided what little families had. A thick slice of raw white onion was placed between bread spread with butter or lard, seasoned only with salt. The flavor was bold, almost aggressive, clearing sinuses and filling bellies with something substantial enough to call dinner. During the Depression, raw onions cost pennies and lasted weeks in cool cellars, making them reliable sustenance when nothing else was available. The sandwich required no cooking and could be assembled in seconds by tired workers returning home. Children learned to eat them without complaint because complaining meant going hungry. The sharpness seemed to wake up taste buds dulled by bland, poverty-era meals. Seniors today remember the sandwich with mixed emotions, recalling both the hardship it represented and the strange satisfaction it provided. What seemed like desperation food actually delivered vitamins and fullness when families had almost nothing. Before deli counters became a daily stop, there was the Underwood deviled ham can, small, white paper label, red devil logo, and a pull tab that required more wrist strength than any child had. The William Underwood Company started canning this spiced ham paste in 1868 out of New England, making it one of the oldest trademarked food products in American history. Your mother mixed it with a fork, just the ham, yellow mustard, maybe a scrape of mayo, and spread it across white bread so fast you barely saw the knife move. Through the 40s and 50s, that little can sat in every pantry, next to the Vienna sausages and the saltines. The flavor was sharp, peppery, salty, the kind of taste that points you to a specific kitchen. Kids who carried those sandwiches in wax paper can still describe the smell when they peeled it open at the cafeteria table. Most of them can tell you exactly who made it. Underwood deviled ham came in a flat tin with a red devil on the label, the oldest trademarked food product in America, stamped with that little pitchfork since 1868. The meat inside was ground so fine it was almost a paste, salty and smoky and spreadable with a butter knife, and you either loved it or you pretended it didn't exist. The old-timers mixed it with sweet pickle relish and a dab of mustard, spread it on soft white bread, and called it lunch. Children who opened their lunch boxes to find one either traded it fast or ate it in 2 bites before anyone could comment. The genius of the can was that it kept forever, cost next to nothing, and didn't require refrigeration until you cracked it open. For families feeding 5 or 6 on a shift worker's pay, That little red devil did more work than any filet mignon ever could. Nobody talks about deviled ham anymore, but the cans are still there on the bottom shelf, waiting for someone to remember. Vienna sausage sandwiches transformed small canned sausages into quick meals that children and adults devoured during the mid-20th century. The tiny, pale sausages came packed in broth, soft enough to eat cold from the can or sliced lengthwise onto bread. Their mild, slightly smoky flavor appealed to picky eaters while providing protein costing less than fresh meat. Mothers appreciated how cans stored indefinitely in pantries, ready for emergencies or unexpected mouths to feed. The sausages were mashed with a fork or sliced thin, then layered on bread with mustard or mayonnaise. Some families added onions or pickles for crunch. The sandwich assembled in minutes without cooking, perfect for hot summer days when lighting the stove meant heating the entire house. Children often asked for these specifically, finding the small sausages more appealing than mysterious lunch meats. Seniors remember raiding pantries for Vienna sausage cans as after-school snacks. The cans represented affordable, satisfying, protein-rich meals. In the 1930s, two things sat in nearly every American pantry: a jar of peanut butter and a jar of mayonnaise. Someone put them together on bread, and the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich became a survival staple that lasted decades. The richness of peanut butter against the tang of mayo creates something unexpectedly balanced, almost savory, with enough fat and protein to carry a body through hard work. Skippy hit shelves in '33. Miracle Whip arrived the same year, and both gave families affordable staples that stretched across every meal. Kids ate these 5 days running because there was nothing else, and complaining about food was something you did not do. The sandwich held through the '50s, mostly in the South, where Duke's mayo and thick peanut butter on white bread was as ordinary as breathing. It slipped away not because anyone turned against it. It just got buried under the choices that came after the lean years ended. Nobody under 40 knows what an olive and cream cheese sandwich is, but mention it to anyone who grew up in the 1960s or 70s and you'll get a story. The spread was simple: softened Philadelphia cream cheese, chopped green olives with the pimiento still in them, and just enough olive brine to loosen it up. Some families added pecans, others swore by walnuts. The whole thing went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, and appeared at every baby shower, bridal luncheon, and bridge club meeting from Mobile to Minneapolis. The women who made it never used a recipe. They knew the ratio by the color of the spread: pale green with flecks of red, loose enough to smear but stiff enough to hold the bread together. One woman remembered eating her first one from a cooler in her grandmother's back seat during a road trip, and the taste, briny, creamy, cold from the ice, was the taste of every summer drive she ever took. The woman who packed that cooler has been gone for years. The sandwich went with her. Sugar sandwiches were childhood treats disguised as meals during years when candy was unaffordable and sweetness came from whatever the pantry offered. Soft, white bread was spread with butter, then sprinkled generously with white sugar that sparkled like tiny crystals against the yellow fat. The combination created a simple pleasure that satisfied sweet cravings without requiring expensive ingredients. Children ate these after school, their eyes lighting up at something that felt like dessert but cost almost nothing. The butter melted slightly from the bread's warmth, creating pockets where sugar dissolved into sweet slurry. Parents made these knowing a little sweetness could brighten difficult days when money was tight. The sandwich required no cooking and could be assembled by the smallest hands in the household. Seniors remember begging for these as rewards for chores, not realizing their parents were stretching resources creatively. What seemed like indulgence was actually survival cooking dressed up as celebration. Cold baked beans mashed between two slices of bread. That was a factory worker's lunch in every mill town from Fall River to Flint. British immigrants brought the habit to American shores, and it settled into the lunch pails of men who worked 12-hour shifts and needed something that held together in a tin box until noon. The beans were Saturday night's leftovers, thick with molasses and salt pork remnants, scooped cold onto buttered bread and pressed flat. Sometimes a tomato slice if the garden was producing, sometimes a leaf of lettuce, mostly just beans and bread. A 1929 sandwich cookbook recommended them mashed smooth with mayonnaise and chopped onion for variety, and dozens of factory towns had their own versions. Some with a drizzle of vinegar, some with a smear of mustard across the top slice. The taste was sweet, salty, dense, the kind of lunch that sat heavy in your stomach and kept you standing through the shift. When the factories closed and lunch counters replaced pails, the baked bean sandwich quietly left the table. The fried peanut butter and banana sandwich got its fame from Memphis, but it lived in kitchens long before anyone called it the Elvis. The trick, the one his cook Mary Jenkins figured out, was toasting the bread first, loading it with creamy peanut butter and sliced banana, pressing the halves together, and frying the whole thing in butter until the outside turned golden and the inside went soft. His father, Vernon, showed Mary the method. She said Elvis ate them at every hour, butter running down his arm, never once measuring anything. In February of 1976, he flew from Graceland to Denver at 1 in the morning to eat the Fool's Gold loaf, a hollowed-out French bread stuffed with a jar of peanut butter, a jar of preserves, and a pound of bacon, at a hangar on the tarmac. That sandwich cost $49.95. The simple version, though, the one you could make at midnight with whatever was in the pantry, that was the one worth remembering. Tomato sandwiches were summer's greatest gift to budget-conscious households across the rural South during the Depression and post-war years. When backyard gardens overflowed with ripe red tomatoes, families turned that abundance into simple meals costing almost nothing. The preparation required only thick slices of vine-ripened tomato, soft white bread, mayonnaise, and salt and pepper. The bread soaked up the tomatoes' juices, creating a soft texture that contrasted beautifully with the cool, sweet tart fruit. Seniors who grew up in working-class homes remember eating these standing over the kitchen sink, letting the juice drip freely. The sandwich represented self-sufficiency and home gardening when every dollar mattered. Mothers packed them for lunch when garden produce was plentiful, knowing they provided vitamins without spending precious grocery money. Today, heirloom tomato sandwiches appear on fancy restaurant menus, but nothing matches the memory of homegrown tomatoes between cheap white bread. Nobody under 50 has heard of the egg and olive sandwich, but mention it to a woman who attended a church potluck before 1970 and watch her face change. Chopped green olives folded into creamy egg salad, the brine cutting through the richness of yolk, made this a fixture at ladies' luncheons and covered dish suppers through the 40s and 50s. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with a fork, a handful of manzanilla olives, mayonnaise, a dash of paprika. It went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, arranged with the kind of precision that said presentation was its own pride. Jars of stuffed olives cost pennies, and every kitchen had one. The sandwich disappeared when formal gatherings stopped and convenience foods took over. Nobody killed it. The world just moved too fast for crustless triangles. At the deli counter, olive loaf sat next to the Bologna and the pimiento loaf in a row of pink processed meats that all looked vaguely related. It was Bologna's stranger cousin, the same smooth, finely ground pork and beef, but shot through with chunks of green pimiento stuffed olives that stared back at you from every slice like tiny eyes. Oscar Mayer made the version most people knew, pre-packaged in thin slices with that particular plastic smell that clung to the meat no matter how fast you peeled it off. Paired with a slice of American cheese on white bread, it was a lunchbox constant for kids who didn't get to choose what they ate. Some loved the salty olive bursts, most tolerated them. A few traded the sandwich away before the bell rang. Oscar Mayer stopped making olive loaf quietly, the way all unfashionable foods disappear, not with an announcement but with an empty space on the shelf that nobody noticed until it was too late to say goodbye. Syrup sandwiches carried sweetness and energy to children who needed both during years when sugar was rationed and treats were rare. Sorghum, molasses, or cane syrup was drizzled generously over soft bread, sometimes topped with another slice, sometimes eaten open-faced. The dark, sticky sweetness spread across the bread like liquid candy, providing quick fuel for active children and tired workers alike. The flavor was deep and complex, far more interesting than plain sugar, with mineral notes and earthy undertones. Families kept jars of syrup in pantries throughout the South, using it as affordable sweetener when refined sugar cost too much. The sandwich required no cooking and assembled in seconds when hunger struck between meals. Children begged for these as treats, not realizing they were also survival food born from necessity. The syrup's thickness made the sandwich filling despite containing little actual nutrition beyond carbohydrates. Seniors remember the sticky fingers and satisfied smiles following every syrup sandwich. She buttered the bread first, always. Then the sugar, white, granulated, poured from the bag and pressed into the butter with the back of a spoon until the crystals caught. The butter and sugar sandwich was the after-school secret of every kid who grew up where the grocery money ran thin by Thursday. Nobody called it a recipe. You just knew. The crunch of sugar against soft bread, the way it dissolved on your tongue, the faint salt of butter underneath, that was the reward for making it through another day. It showed up in mining towns and mill villages during the Depression, and it never really left. Through the 50s and 60s, kids in Appalachia, the rural South, and factory neighborhoods from Detroit to Pittsburgh still came home to this. Some used brown sugar, some added cinnamon, some just used whatever bread was going stale because waste was something those kitchens refused. Thomas's sold date nut bread in a can, a small, heavy cylinder that you opened from both ends and pushed the loaf out whole, dark as gingerbread and dense with chopped dates and walnuts. You sliced it thin, spread each round with cold cream cheese, and ate it in the afternoon with tea or coffee while the house was quiet. It was a tea room sandwich before it was a home sandwich, the kind of thing women's clubs served at luncheons in the 1950s alongside finger sandwiches and fruit salad in stemmed glasses. By the 70s, the canned loaf had moved from tea rooms to kitchen counters, and the women who bought it didn't need a club meeting to justify the indulgence. They ate it standing at the counter the way men ate Liverwurst, quickly, alone, with no one watching. Thomas's still makes it, but the women who sliced it thin enough to see light through the bread are mostly gone now, and their daughters buy sourdough instead. Potted meat sandwiches turned tiny cans of processed meat spread into filling meals that sustained working families across America. The small, affordable cans contained finely ground meat mixed with seasonings and gelatin, creating a spreadable paste covering bread easily. The flavor was salty and vaguely meaty, with smooth texture that children found less intimidating than tougher cuts. Spread thick between slices of soft white bread, sometimes with mustard or pickle slices, potted meat made a complete sandwich for pennies. The cans required no refrigeration until opened, making them perfect pantry staples for homes without reliable icebox access. Families bought them by the case when money allowed, stockpiling affordable protein against uncertain times. The sandwiches appeared at picnics, in lunchboxes, and on dinner tables when paychecks ran thin. Children grew up eating them without realizing how clever their mothers were at stretching resources. Today, potted meat still exists in stores, a quiet reminder of survival cooking. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. She kept the Braunschweiger in the back of the refrigerator, wrapped in its original casing, and sliced it herself with a thin knife she used for nothing else. Braunschweiger was liverwurst that had been smoked, giving it a deeper, almost bacon-like richness that spread across dark pumpernickel like it was born there. Jones Dairy Farm sold it in stubby rolls at every Midwestern grocery store, and the label hadn't changed since the 50s. Her version went on pumpernickel with a thick slice of raw onion and a smear of brown mustard so sharp it made your eyes water. You didn't ask why she preferred it to regular liverwurst. You watched her build it layer by layer, with the same hands that patched your jeans and braided your hair. Years later, you tried to make one yourself from a roll you found at a German butcher shop 2 towns over. The mustard was right. The onion was right. But the pumpernickel was wrong, and you couldn't figure out what she'd done differently until you realized it wasn't the bread. It was the kitchen. Mustard sandwiches represented rock-bottom survival food during the hardest years of American poverty, yet they carried surprising dignity in their simplicity. 2 slices of bread spread generously with bright yellow mustard created a meal costing virtually nothing but still feeling intentional. The tangy, vinegary bite provided flavor intensity that plain bread could never deliver alone. Children walked to school with these in their lunch pails during the Depression, eating them without shame because everyone understood hard times. The mustard's sharpness fooled the brain into thinking something more substantial had been consumed. Families kept large jars of cheap yellow mustard in pantries, knowing it could stretch meals when nothing remained. The sandwich required no refrigeration and could be made by the youngest child. Seniors who survived those lean years remember mustard sandwiches with quiet pride, knowing they represented resilience and determination to eat something rather than nothing. These kitchens fed everyone you loved. Leave a comment with the sandwich you haven't tasted in 30 years.